Then, less than a month into the administration, Mike Flynn self-destructed. It started with Flynn facing criticism for alleged remarks to Asian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, someone I knew well. He had been my Moscow counterpart for a time when I was under Secretary of State for Arms Control and International Security in the Bush 43 administration. The criticism intensified dramatically when Flynn seemingly lied to Pence and others about their case-like conversation. Why Flynn would lie about an innocent conversation, I never understood. What senior administration aides, and indeed Trump himself, told me a few days later made more sense, namely that they had already lost confidence in Flynn for his inadequate performance, much as Kissinger had predicted, and the Russian issue was simply a politically convenient cover story. Flynn resigned late on February 13, after the White House storm underwent, just hours after Kellyanne Conway unhappily received the unfair and unfortunate job of telling the ravenous press corps that Flynn had Trump's full confidence. This is the very definition of confusion and disorder. Confusion and disorder, unfortunately, also marked the NSC staff in the administration's first 3 weeks. Personnel choices were in disarray, as CIA Director Mike Pompeo personally took the stunning, nearly unprecedented step of denying sensitive compartmented information clearance to one of Flynn's choices to be a senior director, one of the top-run NSC jobs. Denying this critical clearance, as everyone knew, effectively barred that person from working at the NSC, a stinging blow to Flynn. He also faced innumerable battles with career officials detailed to the NSC during Obama's tenure, but as is customary, still there as the Trump presidency began. These battles provided frequently leaked accounts of bureaucratic blood on the floor at the White House and the Eisenhower Executive Office building. The great array granite Victorian pile across West Executive Avenue housing the bulk of NSC staff. Similarly, on one of Trump's signature campaign issues, stemming illegal immigration, the White House stumbled through one mistake after another in the early days, trying to craft executive orders and policy directives. Judicial challenges were inevitable and likely to be hotly litigated in a judiciary filled with 8 years of Obama appointees. But the White House entirely owned the initial immigration debacles, betraying a lack of transition preparation and internal coordination. A decent channel cable at State, intended to be internal, found its way onto the internet, signed by over 1,000 employees, criticizing the immigration initiative. The press feasted on it, although the cable's arguments were weak, disjointed, and poorly presented. But somehow the cable, and similar arguments by media commentators and Hill opponents, went unanswered. Who was in charge? What was the plan? Surprisingly, Tillerson called 3 days after the Senate Foreign Relations Committee approved his nomination on January 23 by an 11-10 party line vote, pulling me from a corporate board meeting. We talked for 30 minutes, mostly about the state's organizational issues and how the interagency decision-making process worked. Tillerson was gracious and professional, and utterly uninterested in having me as his deputy. Of course, had I been in his shoes, I would have felt the same way. Tillerson later told Elliot Abrams, whom he also considered, that he wanted someone who would work behind the scenes supporting him, not someone who had gained public attention, as I had at the UN and as a Fox commentator. Tillerson asked if I was interested in anything at the state other than deputy, and I said no, having already had the second-best job as a UN ambassador. Tillerson laughed, and we talked about the often fraught relations between secretaries and the UN ambassadors. It was clear that he had not spoken with Haley about their relationship and that he had no idea how to handle the ticking time bomb. I worried that Tillerson was susceptible to capture by the State Department bureaucracy. He had spent his entire 41-year career at Exxon in an environment where there were clear metrics for performance, profit and loss statements being harsh taskmasters, and where the corporate culture was hardly subject to revolutionary change from within. After years of perching at the top of Exxon's hierarchy, believing that all his subordinates were on the same team, it would have been remarkable for Tillerson, sitting in the secretary's 7th floor suite, to assume anything else about the careerists on the floors below him or posted around the world. Precisely because of his background, Tillerson should have surrounded himself with people familiar with the foreign and civil services strengths and weakness, but he went a very different way. He neither sought a culture revolution, as I would have done, nor embraced the building, as all who worked there referred to it, nor sought to control the bureaucracy without fundamentally changing it, as James Baker did. Instead, he isolated himself with a few trusted aides and paid the inevitable price. But with Flynn, fairly and unfairly, crashing and burning, the National Security Advisor job, which I hadn't previously considered because of Flynn's closeness to Trump, was now open. The press speculated that Flynn's successor would be another general, mentioning David Petraeus, Robert Harwood, formerly Navy, now at Lockheed, pushed vigorously by Mattis, or Keith Kellogg, a longtime Trump supporter and now NSC Executive Vice Secretary. Tillerson seemed to be uninvolved, another sign of trouble, both because he was not in the loop and because he didn't seem to realize the potential problem for him if Mattis or Lai got the job, potentially making Tillerson's relations with the White House more difficult. Indeed, news stories were noting Tillerson's low profile generally. Bannon texted me on Friday, February 17, asking me to come to Mar-a-Lago to meet Trump over President's Day weekend. That day, MSNBC's Joe Scarborough tweeted, "I strongly opposed AMB John Bolton for sex states, but the former UN ambassador is Thomas Jefferson in Paris compared to Michael Flynn. In Trump world, this could be helpful." During the Mar-a-Lago primary that weekend, a guest told me he had heard Trump say several times, "I'm starting to really like Bolton." Hadn't I concluded before that I needed to work that crowd harder? Trump interviewed 3 candidates, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, author of a Dereliction of Duty, a superb study of civil military relations in Africa. Lieutenant General Robert Caslin, commandant of West Point, and me. I had met and spoken with McMaster years before and admired his willingness to espouse controversial positions. Meeting Caslin for the first time, I saw him as a personable and highly competent official. Both were in full dress uniform, immediately demonstrating their marketing skills. Me, I still had my mustache. Trump greeted me warmly, saying how much he respected me and that he was happy to consider me to be national security advisor. Trump also asked if I would consider a title like Bannon's, who was also present in the private bar on Mar-a-Lago's first floor, along with Priebus and Kushner, covering strategic issues. Thus, apparently, I could be one of the many generic assistants to the president, of which there were already too many in Trump's White House, with only slapdash efforts at definition their roles and responsibilities. This was a complete non-starter for me, so I politely declined, saying I was only interested in the national security advisor job. As Henry Kissinger once reported said, never take a government job without an inbox. The president assured me that Flynn's successor would have a free hand in organizational and personnel matters, which I believed essential in running an effective NSC staff and interagency process. We covered the full range of world issues. A tour did the horizon, as the State Department loves to call it, and Trump interjected at one point, "This is so great. John sounds just like he does on television. I could just keep listening. I love it." Kushner asked, "How do you handle the point that you are so controversial, that people either love you or hate you?" As I was opening my mouth to answer, Trump said, "Yeah, just like me. People either love me or hate me. John and I are exactly alike." I added only that one should be judged on performance, listing a few of what I consider to be my foreign policy achievements. The meeting ended with the discussion about Russia, as Trump said, "I saw you talking the other day about the INF issue," referring to the intermediate-range nuclear forces treaty with Russia. He then explained why it was so inequitable that no nations other than Russia and America, such as China, Iran, or North Korea, were limited in developing intermediate-range capabilities, and that the Russians were violating the treaty. This was almost exactly what I had said, so I had no doubt he was still watching and absorbing Fox News. I suggested we tell Putin to comply with Russia's INF obligations, or we would withdraw, with which Trump agreed with. Bannon and I left together, Bannon saying, "That was great." Nonetheless, my clear impression was that Trump was going to pick a general. I returned to my hotel, and later in the day, Bannon and Priebus asked me to breakfast with them at Mar-a-Lago the next morning. Priebus suggested alternatives to the national security advisor position, saying with Trump, "Remember who you are dealing with." They promised a real influence, access to Trump, and the inevitability of administration turnover, meaning I would eventually become Secretary of State or something. Based on my government experience, I explained that to run the bureaucracy, you need control the bureaucracy, not just watch it from the White House. The NSC was a mechanism to coordinate the national security agencies, and the job required someone who had the experience at lower levels on how it worked and didn't work. I didn't make an impression. I think Trump had said to them, in effect, get him into the administration so he can defend us on television. That was exactly the last thing I intended to do. Regarding policies, I had little or nothing to do with the formulating. At one point, Bannon said, "Help me out here, Ambassador," which was actually what I was trying to do, although he meant that I should tell him what else would induce me to join the administration. Flying back to Washington, I saw on the airplane Wi-Fi that Trump had picked McMaster. That was no surprise, but I was surprised to hear Trump then say, "I know John Bolton. We're going to be asking him to work with us in a somewhat different capacity. John is a terrific guy. We had some really good meetings with him. He knows a lot. He had a good number of ideas that I must tell you I agree with very much. So we'll be talking to John Bolton in a different capacity." I clearly hadn't made my point about the best role for me, certainly not to Kushner, who texted me shortly thereafter. "Great spending time together. We really want to get you on the team. Let's talk this week to find the right spot, as you have a lot to offer and we have a unique chance to get some good done." Madeleine Westerhout, Trump's secretary in the outer oval, the room where Trump's personal assistants sat, called on Tuesday to connect me to Trump, but I had my cell phone on silent and didn't catch it. Predictably, Trump was tied up when I later called back, so I asked the Westerhout if she knew what the subject was, fearing a true full-court press. She said, "Oh, he just wanted to tell you how wonderful you are, and said he wanted to thank me for coming to Mar-a-Lago." I told her that I was very kind, but not wanting to burden his schedule. I said he didn't really need the call again, hoping to dodge the bullet. A few days later, Westerhout, always exuberant back then, left another message saying the president wanted to see me. I was convinced I would be pitched on some amorphous position, but fortunately I left the country for almost 2 weeks and dodged the bullet again. You can run, but you cannot hide, and a meeting with Trump was finally scheduled for March 23. After lunch with McMaster at the White House mess, I texted Bannon in advance to be transparent. I was only interested in the Secretary of State or the national security jobs, and neither was open as far as I could tell. By coincidence, I entered the West Wing for the first time in over 10 years as the press scrum waited outside to interview Republican House members meeting with Trump on the falling effort to repeal Obamacare. Just what I needed, even though I didn't plan to answer any questions. In the Twitter era, however, even a non-story is a story, as one reporter retweeted. Glenn Thrush, John Bolton, just walked into the West Wing. I asked him what he was doing. He smiled and said, "Healthcare." I saw later that the Washington Post, Bob Acosta, had tweeted while I was walking in. Robert Acosta, Trump wants to bring John Bolton into the administration. That's why Bolton is at WH today, per a Trump confident, ongoing convo. I had a perfectly pleasant lunch with McMaster, discussing Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, and we then went to the Oval to see Trump, who was just finishing lunch with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Nelson Peltz, a New York financier.